So in terms of like implications to Australia, the Australian part of the business is actually fairly healthy. So like, I went
Just
through.
saying, do we need to clarify
I
our
don't think so
disclaimer?
because we're probably not going
Okay.
to talk about like buying or selling the stock.
Okay.
But in terms of like EB Games for Australia, like this whole GameStop debacle or kerfuffle, what does it mean for EB Games Australia? I think like number one, having a head company that's healthier is always going to be a good thing. So they are a fully owned subsidiary of GameStop, the US. And I like being the nerd that I am. I went through their financial disclosures and like EB Games, as because there's EB Games Canada as well, but the Australian EB Games is the healthiest component of their whole business. The only reason why it's reported as losing money in the US is because of FX, like the fact of currency differences. But if you just analyze the business on its own, it's actually performing all right. They do 500 million of sales per year, EB
Yeah,
Games.
it's crazy for me to compare when you hear the doom and gloom of GameStop in the US. When I look as a consumer, when I look at EB Games in Australia, it looks like it's a very good business. It looks like you're obviously only seeing what the consumer sees, which is nothing about the financials. But I never got that impression, and that's why I'm just thinking, yeah, like in general, not even this stock situation. At some point it makes sense that someone might even just buy the Australian operations if GameStop itself doesn't, it has to go belly up in a decade or whatever, just because it seems like in Australia it's still going well, but who knows where the games industry's at from a digital retail standpoint in, even the next generation, who knows?
Yeah, I thought about that as well. Like, I'm not really sure who would buy EB Games in Australia because it's like it does make money, but it doesn't make like it's not killing it or anything like that, like JB
Mm.
Hi-Fi is.
Maybe JB Hi-Fi will buy it.
Well, it doesn't really make sense to buy
It's the
it,
only one I can kind of think
but
of.
it doesn't really make
Because
sense for them because they're almost always got a JB Hi-Fi somewhere that EB Games is, right?
doesn't EB usually, yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
like, to me, it's like a Myer or a Coles or whoever. I'm still confused where all that stuff's at these days of ownership. But
The Coles
one of
Myer,
those,
yeah.
well, they split, didn't they?
Yeah,
Coles
they
Myer.
split.
Did they split?
Yeah,
Yeah, they
Okay.
did.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like, to me, it would be one of those groups because that makes sense. Now you've got obviously your things like Big W that are selling, but that's such a small part of their business, the games part. Whereas JB Hi-Fi seems
Yeah.
like it's a pretty big component. So.
I don't know how profitable it is. I mean, Kmart completely closed the game section as far as I remember.
No, they brought it back. You're right. They did
They're
close it
bringing
for a
it.
while, but
So
they brought
they
it back.
brought hardware back.
No,
but
they're
they don't
bringing
have an
games
actual...
back as well.
Are they bringing games back? When?
Yeah.
They're
They
bringing
announced it last year.
They're bringing sexy back.
Oh, awesome. Because, yeah, they closed it down, and then I noticed they started bringing gaming gear in, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
Keyboards, mice, key lights, whatever. And then...
Well, because you can't get digital versions of those,
Because you can't. Well, exactly.
And I think
you can if you just turn your monitor to white screen and crank up the brightness.
I wonder if that's the thing about the Australian market, though, because if you look at the US, GameStop, and just buying a game, like most games in the US, it's $60 US or $60 on the digital storefront, right? So it's parity in the US, the way it works. Whereas in Australia, we have a weird pricing structure where you can pretty much get a new game for like 60-ish or 70-ish Australian dollars. And that
Just not
translates
at
to like
EB.
50 or 60, right? Yeah, but you can match, you can do all this other kind of
You
stuff.
usually
right?
match, yeah. They have the policy.
Whereas
so
the
I wonder
digital
what
one, it's like
percentage match.
90 Australian dollars a
Yeah.
lot of the times. So, I would love to know the numbers and the split between digital to physical in Australia. I bet it's like very different than the US, which is like 50-50 now.
Just
I want to
think
know
about-
the split, and I'd love to know the number of sales that are price matched. Because EB still sell a lot of games from memory at full price when they come out.
Oh, yeah,
The full
definitely.
$99.95.
Yeah, definitely.
And unless you know that you can price match, which obviously a lot of people do, but there's also, I think, a lot of people that walk in there and they just buy it for whatever it is. And there's usually little kinks where you can't match it because this particular edition has something else that technically JB doesn't have, etc.
Oh, yeah,
so I've
that's
run
right.
into those
Yeah,
issues
yeah.
before. And sometimes I feel they do it intentionally just so they don't have to price match. But, the option is there, so I'd love to see what the split is. So you were going to say something, Swinny?
just thinking, just games retail in general in Australia now, we know that there's always been small stores, that a lot of those don't exist anymore. But I remember when EB Games really came to Australia. So the first store was opened in '97, but I didn't really start seeing any stores until 2000s myself.
Yeah,
And I don't
same.
know if that's. And JB Hi-Fi never used to sell games, so I'm just like, it just used to be for me like Target.
Yeah, or
Target
Big
was like the
W.
Yeah,
main
that was
place,
kind of it.
and
Yeah,
Toys R Us and places like that.
Yeah, it's
but
true.
we
And
don't.
it's just,
Yeah,
yeah. So whereas now it feels like the idea of JB Hi-Fi not having games and EB Games not existing, just such a weird
yeah.
concept to me.
And when did
Um,
JB Hi-Fi start? Because they was that in the 90s? I know. I think
no, it
the
was
one
in
in
the
Keeler
2000.
was in the
It was
2000s.
in the 2000s, and it was after EB Games
You mean when they
Wow,
entered the
started
market.
selling
that long ago.
games? You're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I was thinking when JB actually started, but yeah, you're right.
It was
Oh,
like the
JB.
Probably
80s.
more
It was like
important.
the 80s.
More
or
important
something.
when they actually started selling games. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you don't really have. I mean, you've got gamesmen who I think are based in Sydney.
Yeah, they are.
That are an independent retailer, independent as far as I'm aware. I don't think they're owned by anyone.
Yeah, they are.
And then used to have Dungeon Crawl, which was in Melbourne. I
Oh, yeah,
think
yeah,
they
yeah,
went
yeah.
fully online. I don't quote me. I just remember I think they closed their store, the physical store, and I think they moved online. It was one on Elizabeth Street from memory, up the
There
stairs.
was a fantastic store. I wish I remembered its name so I could see if they're still open in Mooney Ponds. And I remember going like they would hold competitions there, like beat the master. And I actually
Cool.
I beat the master at Dr. Mario and won myself Fire Emblem Path of Radiance for the GameCube, which was
I
$100
wonder
game
how
at that
they.
time.
That's crazy.
And
Because well, it's worth way more than that now.
yeah, and I won that from beating a Dr. Mario Master. Just like I had never played anyone competitively Dr. Mario really before, and I'm like, man, all those times of just sitting in my car playing the Dr. Mario on Game Boy Advance version, I was like, oh man, that paid off. Got me Fire Emblem.
That's
Nice.
awesome. Yeah, so look, I think in summary, like this is not going to negatively impact the Australian operations. It's probably going to alleviate some pressure that they already have. But I do think the end game here is they'll be selling off EB games eventually to someone else. But that'll be the question. It's who would want to buy it. Maybe that's a bit of the challenge. So
Well, they've got a really good foothold in Australia now, so it makes sense to me that someone would think of that as a good investment. But like we know, the whole digital movement is going to change everything. So
It will, but let's not forget they don't just sell games. If I look behind into God's thing, I mean, I know I'm
yeah,
sure a
the
lot of that
Amiibo
stuff
stuff.
you buy from eBay and other places, but they've opened up Zing
Yeah,
relatively recently. Although I still don't understand why they have to have two completely separate stores when there's so much stock that gets sold between both. And you can tell they're trying to go into different markets like that where you have to have the physical thing. But even that's hard to compete in because, again, you're dealing with eBay, you're dealing with Amazon, where you can a lot of the times get that stuff cheaper than full retail in a store. Not as accessible in some ways for a lot of people, but it's still cheaper. So it's tough in this market.
yeah,
Unless there's like some sort of a weird like almost like I don't even know how to define this, like a push from gamers to say, hey, we're not gonna buy things, as much digitally. We want to support the local stores. We want to keep, get people to stay in their jobs, and we want to go to a brick and mortar store because it's just something I ethically want to do. But I just don't really see that happening on a grand enough scale.
that's fair enough. All right, let's move on to our next story, which